Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to cover if Pachyrhinosaurus could survive the Ice Age. Now, this will be my first video covering a topic like this, because my first recent video was covering hybrids, and now we're on Could You Survive? Yeah, weird times. But anyways, let's just get into the overview. Now, let's get into the bare bones coverage of the Pachyrhinosaurus, because we ain't gonna flat out place it into the icy tundra.
Where the fuck am I?
Because that's literally a death sentence, and it would not very be a interesting video. Anyhow, let's now get into the overview. Pachyrhinosaurus is a large ceratopsian dinosaur that lived in the Wet Paddy and Royal Prince Formation around 73.5 to 68 million years ago. The area they lived in was a low floodplain environment. Due to that reason, we're going to be placing them in South Dakota, specifically the Mammoth site. The reason I am putting them there is due to the vast open areas, but also because it has the most dense fossil site of large Ice Age mammals. This will be perfect to place Pachyrhinosaurus. But to further elaborate on which species of Pachyrhinosaurus I'm using Pachyrhinosaurus lacustae, because it's honestly the most memorable of the species and the most popular, if we're going by depiction standards. And we'll also be placing them across North America, specifically near the northwestern hemisphere, in order to spread them out more, and also to make this a very much more interesting video. Also so it can make sense for the scenario. Now, let's look at this environment to see how Pachyrhinosaurus does in it. The environment of the Mammoth site is pretty vast with large open plains and hills, along with some parts of densely covered woodlands. And there were warm spring waters that fed through the area. Now, the temperature of the area was rather humid, that and it somewhat being an arid environment. Pachyrhinosaurus' environment was different, but not too radically different. Its environment primarily consisted of floodplains, along with some woodlands and some swamps. That and the temperatures were different from the Ice Age. Temperatures 68 million years ago being slightly different than modern day temperatures, with the summers being slightly to moderately more warmer than ours. So it's fairly reasonable that they can pretty much adapt to this new climate. Heck, they might even thrive in it. Anyways, due to these factors, these big boys will do very well in their new environment. Their environment does pretty well for them, we need to see if they have the right food and resources to survive in this new place. So, let's move on to that. Now, Pachyrhinosaurus' diet primarily consisted of ferns, shrubs, and cycads, while the South Dakota environment had vast grasslands, which means there will be a lot of grass everywhere for this new species that got displaced in time. Now, does that mean Pachyrhinosaurus could possibly eat it? I say yes. And the reason I say this is because that grass started evolving around the early Cretaceous period, specifically 70 million years ago, while Pachyrhinosaurus existed around 71.2 million years ago. So it's possible that the species had an early run-in with grass. Oh, they probably need to go through drastic changes for their bodies so they can eat grass over time, or just to be more accommodated with it. But if they don't want to eat grass, they can venture into the forest, where they can possibly find ferns, since they still exist today, and very other bearing food items, like bark, shrubs, or even berries. So I think they'll do pretty well in the food and resources category, seeing how the Mammoth site is a vast environment, and not only that, there's a lot of water and it's also pretty easygoing to accommodate their needs for their huge calorie intake. So, they passed this area with flying colors. Although, competition is a different story entirely. Pachyrhinosaurus had a lot of competition back in the day, since they had to live alongside with giant hadrosaurs, ankylosaurids, and other ceratopsians. Can the Ice Age mammals keep up with the Pachyrhinosaurus? Well, possibly, but I think only a few would actually pose a greater threat to Pachyrhinosaurus. Right, let's get the smaller herbivores out of the way. Camelids, llamas, shrub oxen, and bisons will pretty much not pose a huge risk competition-wise. They are relatively small and pale in comparison to the 4,400-pound Pachyrhinosaurus. They're relatively just fodder in that regard. However, one family group will pose a greater challenge to the Pachyrhinosaurus than any other species in the area, and they are responsible for giving this area its name. That group being the mammoths, and the one that will give them the most trouble will be the Columbian mammoth. The primary reason why I say the Columbian mammoth is the bigger threat here is because, well, they were the largest mammoth species discovered at the mammoth site. While the other mammoths will be a problem, the Columbian mammoth will be the greater threat, rivaling Pachyrhinosaurus in size itself. This also means that they will have to compete for resources with Pachyrhinosaurus, and it will probably give Pachyrhinosaurus a way more harder time in this new area than any other species, which could result in territorial conflicts between the two species as they compete over food and resources, and especially the vast grasslands. And seeing how Pachyrhinosaurus has vast caloric intakes, needing about 2 tons or 4 tons of food per day, which is a lot, and Columbian mammoths needing around 0.15 tons per day to eat, or in general, or just will put the two species at odds with each other from time and time and again. But as long as they keep out of each other's territory and generally stay far away from each other, I think Pachyrhinosaurus would do relatively fine. Besides that, I don't see much competition harming them or threatening their way of life. That can be a different story as we look into the Ice Age predators that could threaten them. Pachyrhinosaurus had a multitude of predators back in the day, such as Troodontids, Albertosaurus, and Nagucusaurus. These predators gave Pachyrhinosaurus an absolute challenge back in the day. Can the Ice Age carnivores keep up with them? Well, just to keep it absolutely short,
absolutely not.
Okay, why do I say this? Well, it's due to Pachyrhinosaurus being a 4,000 to 8,000 pound animal. And to be honest, most carnivores in the mammoth site are not that large or heavy to begin with. In fact, I only see a couple carnivores that are capable of taking on Pachyrhinosaurus with extreme amount of difficulty, those being the short-faced bear and the gray wolves. The reason I say the gray wolves is they have a pack-like structure and they can reasonably run down and drive away smaller young individuals or extremely elderly or sick individuals. Although it would be extremely hard just to get a kill on them, it also doesn't help that gray wolves are extremely puntable due to them being smaller than Pachyrhinosaurus. They also might have a harder time catching up with Pachyrhinosaurus due to dinosaurs' unique breathing structure called parotid lungs, which allow dinosaurs to control their breathing in a sense. This would make it extremely hard for the gray wolves to even catch up, so this would probably be a very risky meal for gray wolves unless they're very desperate. Next up is the short-faced bear, which I could reasonably see taking down way more Pachyrhinosauruses than the gray wolf. It's probably because they're not only relatively close to them in size, but they're also quite heavy enough, being around 1,660 pounds. It's relatively close to Pachyrhinosauruses, though not by that much, but close enough. Though the same logic will apply from the gray wolves to them. This will be probably an extremely risky meal to take. This means that the short-faced bear would only take a risk if it was extremely desperate. But the fact of the matter is, when a Pachyrhinosaurus gets fully grown, barely anything is touching it. So, I believe Pachyrhinosaurus would do great in the Ice Age, and they might do extremely well here, probably being a home away from home. But this would be a pretty boring video if I just ended off here. So, let's get into some Spec Evo to see how they would adapt and evolve in this new time period. Alago Aini Nakashi, Raider Buffalo Lizard. The Alla is the constant result of constant run-ins with the Columbian mammoth in the Mammoth site. As a result, the much more stronger, larger Pachyrhinosaurus individuals were able to fend them off better than the smaller ones. Over multiple generations, it resulted in the Alla. The Allas are generally much more larger than their ancient ancestors, being twice their size and close to around the size of a Columbian mammoth. The Alla also has drastic physical characterizations different from their ancestor. Their bosses have grown much more larger and pronounced, making a much more drastic upturn, making it look like a somewhat primitive horn. They also have lighter gray skin, being brownish slightly in color, along with brown stripe patterns that look similar to tree bark or tree branches. They also have a much more larger frill. Speculated that they used this for mating displays. The much more brighter colored frills and the larger they were, the more opportunities a male would get a mate. Their beaks also drastically changed. This is due to their grass-like diet becoming much more wider and broad in order to eat grass, also a result of their general forage behavior diet. Their bosses are used for competition and digging up roots or stripping tree from tree bark. They can also be used to gore their opponents and enemies. They were able to manage to persist past the driest impact, and also the first presence of humans existing on North America, though they wouldn't be able to survive the later years due to the slowly changing climate and the presence of humans. Slowly but surely, they ended up going extinct near close to the 1400s. Tatanka, Buffalo Lizard. Tatanka is a relatively close cousin of the Allas, although unlike their giant cousins, they are much more built for speed, being generally smaller than their larger cousins, relatively close to their ancestors' size. Have a much more smaller frill than their cousins and than their ancestors. Bosses also have a slight more upturn and are drastically slightly smaller than their cousins. They also have a way more pronounced arched back, where a host of muscle attachments and alignments go. They also have much more smaller horns than their cousins and ancestors. Tatanka was able to generally expand farther than their cousins from the Mammoth site. They were able to expand all across North America, along with bison. They were able to develop a symbiotic relationship with each other. The Tatanka protects the smaller mammals, while the bison serve as an early detection and warning system for the Tatanka. Once a Tatanka is fully grown, barely any carnivore in the North American continent can harm them. Well, except for one. When the Tatanka expanded all the way down to Appalachia, they ended up encountering a new predator that wasn't certainly mammalian. In fact, it's an old ancient foe their ancestors faced a long, long time ago. Thank you for watching the video. This took me a while to finish. Months, to be specific, but that's partially due to me being lazy as hell. But yeah, if you're interested in seeing the artist's artworks I used in this video, their links are down in the description below. And if you also noticed that the title said, like, 1, I plan on making up a follow-up video / another Could You Survive video, which I have to get started on sooner or later. The next video probably won't be out for like months, if I'm lucky. Assuming I get my procrastination habit broken, I could get the script done probably like later this week or something like that. But no promises. Anyways, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. But fine, I'll give you a crumb of what's coming next.